Thank you, dear friends, and thank you, Kanaya Blanca, for saying goodbye to me. I assure you I still count to be for some time with you. The title of today's panel is Building a Better World, the legacy of the survivors and celebrating Israel in 60th year. I have called my presentation Icon of Loss. Icon of Loss. But it is about my art. In it I shall speak of the famous photo of the Warsaw ghetto boy, an iconic image that appears in many of my recent paintings. Between the title of today's panel and the subject of my current work, there seems to be a disconnect. In fact, when I began preparing this talk, I wondered, should an event that is celebrating Israel's birth and legacy be presented with the figure of a child that so blatantly evokes the liquidation of the Warsaw ghetto, rather than drawing attention to the most poignant symbol of loss, of mourning and perpetual fear of annihilation, a child that surrenders to death? Wouldn't it be better to speak of rebirth, of resilience, of accomplishments? After all, I have the privilege of a long artistic career, and as you heard before, Yad Vashem gave me a large retrospective, which just closed about a year and a half ago. But it so happens that this specific subject is very, very dear to my heart. Those who are familiar with my art know that I am an artist who mostly asks questions and rarely offers answers. When I first considered the topic I have chosen for today, I was filled with doubt. But within moments, my thoughts wandered off from this celebration to other Jewish celebrations. And I thought of the glasses, for instance, that people break at Jewish weddings, or the unfinished corners of walls in new houses, symbolic reminders of the destruction of the temple. And instantly, my uncertainty was gone. My answer was yes, I'll speak of the boy. What could be more Jewish than that? Indeed, let's speak of the boy. And I shall leave alone the other children, distraught mothers in that photo, the German soldiers with pointed guns, and all the additional participants in this famous picture. I noticed how poignantly the figure of the boy remained detached from the crowd, dedicated to him, and to them are innumerable essays, research papers, and books. I personally know few writers who are writing books on that very specific subject, and have already published some books on that subject. An ever-growing field of exploration. But mine is a separate chapter. Today I shall try to direct our attention to the Warsaw boy in my paintings. So first, let us make a leap of 60 years and land in the newborn state of Israel. And although there was a cloud over our heads, because we were the representatives of the 6 million of victims that had allowed themselves to be slaughtered like sheep. You said it. Yes, this was a literal voicing of a popular reproach. We never gave up the imperative to re-establish our credentials. We knew that the miracle of a Jewish state was at stake. So for the terrible weight of our collective loss, it had to be buried deep, deep inside. It should wait. Anyway, there were no tools to deal with it. The ghosts who lived with us became our silent partners. And we knew that we would pass them on to the future generation. And you just heard about it, a boy of 15. We have just completed a seemingly interminable voyage on this former Cuban banana carrier, which treated its human cargo as if it were lifeless merchandise, hardly allowing us any space to move or air to breathe, generously providing collective seasickness, daily dishwater soup, overcrowded toilets, and forever crying babies. But people rarely complained. We were the chosen ones. We had survived the Shoah. We were the privileged participants of an unprecedented historical event. The hardships of our grueling voyage were accepted with understanding, even joy. Few observers realized that in the whole of the Pan York, together with me, my mother, my stepfather, and thousands of other Olim from DP camps, traveled many thousands of ghosts, perhaps millions of ghosts. They dwelt among us survivors in our humble and hastily erected houses on legs like of stilts of concrete. We had places we could call home. We had a promise of life, and that was great. But I had to learn to live. Looking back at my entire life, I can conclude that my last 65 years of the 75 I am now have been an ongoing therapy, an experience that I surely share with many other artists. But I would like to believe that it was more than that my art is more than a mere process of getting me to feel better. Fortunately, there are many people who believe in my art and reinforce in me this hope. I have arrived to my present mode of expression in the mid-60s, after years of stylistic searching that included a period of youthful expressionism and a later period of... Indeed, I take the symbols that allow me to tell my stories, and under the appearance of a classical style, I incorporate them into my paintings. I try to speak of things I regard as important. The quasi-realism of my pictorial language enables me to communicate thoughts and perplexities, painful remembrances, and even deep hurts. The final result of all this toil is a huge collection of works, a few hundred one-man shows, and the unmistakable life of a wandering Jew, which I assume with pride. So, after the Star of David, the tablets, keys, trees, and tombstones, came to me the figure of the Warsaw boy. In the last 2 or 3 decades, numerous historians, theologians, and educators found much interest in the use of my pictorial language as a visual means of teaching the history of the Holocaust. My seemingly otherworldly paintings, packed with catastrophic debris and decipherable enigmas, permit them to show that history is not a chronicle of shattering facts, but also a moral and psychological phenomenon, one that holds far-reaching implications. It goes without saying that I feel very privileged to have contributed to such endeavors. I had some occasions to observe how young people interacted with the teachers who showed them images of my art and asked for their reaction. I spoke with many students at museums of university that had set up my shows. I saw how the adolescent and inexperienced, at times innocent and naive souls tried to grasp, trigger discussions. I have seen how young people, whether Caucasian, Afro-American, or Asian, identify with the Warsaw boy. For them, he isn't an exclusively Jewish emblem, rather a signal of a timely warning on a universal scale. Also, I perceive in him an iconic dimension, not unlike the images and sounds that are parts of what I imagine as being the building blocks of our civilization, which to me remains ageless. For instance, the names of Bach, Mozart, or Beethoven belong to that kind. I cannot imagine an epoch in history without their music. I tell myself that their music must have existed since time immemorial. All they had to do was to open the respective shutters in their inner ear, and that is the feeling I have when I look at the photo of the Warsaw boy. On one hand, I know that it is an uncontested symbol of the Jewish Holocaust, and it was a finger of a Nazi officer that had opened the shutter of a camera's inner eye and immortalized a Jewish child. But on the other hand, I believe that this boy's grandeur comes from and belongs to eternity. And the reason is that human history is a cruel enterprise. For endless centuries, children have been savagely sacrificed and fallen victims to unimaginable genocides, to brutal wars, and to tribal feuds. Such horrors happened before the time of the Warsaw Boy, after his time, and they all go on happening now, all over the world. Was this the way I perceived the photo when I first saw it published? True, it instantly seized my attention with its transcending force. I also remember that I carefully examined the entire group of participants as if they were players in a passion play, frozen in postures that made up an unexpected perfection of pictorial composition. But it was the lonely figure of the boy that sank deep into my heart. It is as iconic as the Mona Lisa of Da Vinci, as the Sunflowers of Van Gogh, as Warhol's Marilyn, if not more so. His image screams louder than Munch's scream. He is the Jewish crucifixion. His hopeless figure is more captivating than Chagall's Jew nailed to a cross with a prayer shawl tied around his loins and the images of desolation that surround him. Because of all that, the much published and the live, and that he has recently moved into my studio, and there he functions as my live model. But getting him into the paintings wasn't an easy task. On my part, it demanded some maturation as well as courage. Just the popularity and overexposure of his image made me reluctant. But there was a personal bond between him and me, and it was of consequence. In the Vilna ghetto, I was his age, and I looked, as did thousands of other children, destined for the same fate, exactly like him. Same cap, same outgrown coat, same short pants. I always consider this picture a kind of portrait of myself in those times. This may be a presumptuous thought, since, as I said, we do not know if the authentic boy survived, whereas I did. However, his tragic figure that represents more than 1.5 million of murdered Jewish children radiated an aura of holiness. For a long time I studied this sacred image, lived in its presence, but was afraid to make it part of my pictorial world. Its authenticity had an incredible power. I dared not challenge it. Besides, I have always found insufferable those books, movies, and paintings that sentimentalize the Holocaust. And I feared this boy as if he were a trap. The passing of time made me reconsider. The Western world began erecting monuments to the Holocaust. Many such projects are still in the making. Some are impressive, but many are puzzling, if not painfully inadequate. The magnitude of the subject often defeats a series of small canvases that would be dedicated to his memory. I painted impossible memorials, tombstones of sorts, humble and perishable reliquaries made of rubble, cutouts and throwaways. All of them called up his ghost-like presence. Such were the only tangible markings of memory that I could produce. Thus, the boy from Warsaw, my new friend, this alter ego of mine began emerging in my canvases, and suddenly I painted him again and again, and with time I began to feel that not 15 or 20 such imagined tombstones should arise in those non-existent cemeteries, but an entire 1.5 million. They dragged him to the courtyard and shot him. His body was left for hours in a puddle of blood as a warning to any other Jew who might try to remain outside the ghetto. It is vain of me to hope that through my art I can somehow live now for the two of us, for Samek and myself. And in this way his obliterated future will not have been totally lost. Alive in my mind and work, he and the ghetto boy helped me safeguard the memory of all those martyred children. the entire million and more. And as I say, the more time passes, and the more I see how very little the world is ready to learn from past mistakes, the more this boy transcends the Jewish tragedy and ends up representing. Remember gives us pain, but also consolation. And it helps us to accept grief. When people deal with inevitable loss, established rituals, forget that the pounding of the machine of our subconscious isn't that very easily oiled or appeased. I believe that just as the destruction of the temple has created in the Jewish culture and religion a body of clearly defined public rituals of mourning, so today's art, literature, and music may well seek to provide openings for the collective awareness of a loss that defies all rational explanation. I am looking at the sad eyes of my friend from Warsaw, and I think that he agrees with me. Let me conclude with just this little thought. A big exhibition of my work will open in the Holocaust Museum of Florida in March of next year. But this year, in my gallery in Boston, there is an exhibition of 36 paintings of the boy of Warsaw. After I sent these 36 paintings, because this is the size of the gallery, I realized suddenly 36 Lamed Vav, 36 just men, Lamed Vav Tzadikim, these might be little just boys. I was even surprised by the choice of the number. But then I realized something else that was in it. Lamed Vav. It is in Hebrew, Lamed Vav, which is 36. It is in Hebrew also Lamed Vav, teach about the 6. And this has touched me very profoundly, and I think that this is your job. Thank you very much.